Hey, everybody, it's Dan Harms, and this is lesson one. Lesson one for Confirmation Formation. This is a story about the mission of the church and salvation history. And we'll also talk about covenants a little bit. But it's a great lesson because we put the Bible into context. We basically talk about what is the story, like what's the overarching narrative of all this beautiful, inspired scripture. How does this all tie together into one continuous story that makes sense? And two, what is the church? What is the point of the church? Where did the church come from? How did we get here? These two stories tie together in a really, really beautiful way. So let's start with salvation history, because this stuff is fantastic. In a nutshell, in like a very itty bitty teeny tiny way, all of the Old Testament, right, all this kind of goodness can be summed up into this. It's basically, it's a love story. It's a story about a father reuniting with his children. All right, and so what do you mean? Way back at the very, very beginning of Scripture, we see Adam and Eve, right? They're in this perfect, beautiful relationship with God, and they fall out of that relationship. If you came to the lesson, you'd hear all this kind of great stuff about the serpent and protectors and all kinds of great stuff. Gardening, we'll get into all lots of weird things. But what you need to know is that Adam and Eve, right, they were in this perfect relationship with God where they lacked for nothing. They wanted for nothing. They were in this perfect, just loving situation. It was so good, so much goodness, right? But sin enters the world, and sin tempts Adam and Eve to fall, and so they do. And when they fall from grace, they're broken in that relationship with God their Father. And what we see that comes next are a whole series of different relationships that God forms with humanity that get increasingly larger and larger and larger over time until God creates this final covenant where it's him re-embracing and offering his children the world. It's offering the world a way to get back to the Garden of Eden, to get back to that perfect place where Adam and Eve once were. And so what do these covenants look like, and what is salvation history? So salvation history starts with Adam and Eve, which are a couple, right? It's God's relationship with this couple. He creates a covenant with them. And we're going to talk about covenant in a couple moments, but just know that it was a covenant with Adam and Eve. That covenant gets broken, and the next covenant that God forms with humanity after he realizes, okay, I got to start, re-engaging with my people, is with Noah, right? And now instead of a covenant just with a couple, with Adam and Eve, now he forms a covenant with Noah and his family, right? And so it gets a little bit broader who God is reaching out to and who God is entering into a covenant with. Fast forward a little bit, we end up with Abraham, right? And Abraham has, Father Abraham, his many sons, right? Father Abraham has the tribes of Israel, right? And it's from the descendants of Abraham that we get the 12 tribes of Israel. Right, and so now we've gone from a couple to a family to 12 tribes, right? And then it isn't until we see Moses and God enters into a covenant with Moses, and Moses is here to lead all the tribes of Israel, right, who have become a nation, right? They've bloomed out, they've become this whole nation of people. And God enters into a covenant with Moses and with the people of the nation of Israel, right? And so, boom, off we go. So we've gone from couple to family, to tribes, to a nation, until finally we get to King David, right? And David is a king, which is awesome. He's got David again. If you came to the lesson, you get this whole cool backstory about who David was and fighting Goliath and like his songs and dancing, and like David was a Renaissance man. Anyhow, David, because he's a king, enters into a covenant with God, and he takes the nation of Israel and extends that covenant away from just the nation and to a full kingdom, right? And so gradually, like this relationship that God is forming with humanity gets larger and larger and larger, and that's where things start to get really interesting, right? Because that basically brings us through the whole narrative of the Old Testament. So real quick, let's touch on what a covenant is, because a covenant is different than what you might use to describe it, which would be a contract. A contract is basically an exchange of goods. Hey, somebody has this pen. I've got this pen. I will enter into a contract with you. I will sell you this pen if you give me like 12 shekels, right? You give me 12 shekels. I give you this pen. Perfect, right? We had a contract. It was awesome. You can break the contract. The contract is generally an exchange of goods. A covenant is different because a covenant is actually giving of a person, right? It's a sacrificial giving of a person unto another. And so here's a great example of this is marriage. When we look at what marriage is, a lot of people are like, oh, marriage is just a contract. That's why you get a prenuptial agreement or whatever, right? In the eyes of the church, like marriage is not a contract. Marriage is two people, right? A man and a woman who are pledging themselves to the other person, right? Saying that I will literally give you myself, right? Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Man and women unite to become one person, right? And they love each other and they give themselves to each other sacrificially to enter into a new relationship. And that's what God is calling us to, and that's what God keeps entering into throughout the course of salvation history, a covenant. It's a much deeper thing than just a contract, because there's no money involved, right? It's actually a giving of persons. So if we give ourselves to God, God promises to give himself to us, right? And God is always faithful in these covenants. Okay, so fine. So we went from couple to family to tribe to nation to kingdom of David. And then enters Jesus, Son of Man, coming to redeem the whole world, right? And that's what Jesus preaches. That's the crazy thing. That's what keeps blowing the minds of all these Pharisees and rabbis and Jewish people of the day is Jesus is proclaiming a gospel that is for all people, right? That's why he goes and he finds like the Gentiles and he's preaching to the Syrophoenicians, right? And the Samaritans and all these people who are outside of the kingdom of Israel, right? He's going to those people and he's saying this gospel, right? This promise, this covenant that God is offering you is available to you, not just the Jews, right? And it's not about Mosaic law. It's not about how well you wash your hands and abide by all the rules that God gave Moses, right? And that Moses and developed, right, into this, over 600 laws that you had to abide by if you were a Jewish person. Jesus is like, it's not about those rules, man. It's not about those rules. And so we see in all kinds of different places where he's saying that this is a covenant that I'm offering. I'm offering a covenant that is not just for the Jews, and is not just for the Gentiles, and is not just for slaves or free people. It is for everyone. It is for the entire world, right? And so he's like, look, what happens in a covenant? I am giving myself to you. I am literally laying down my life for you. Your end of this bargain is you just have to choose to accept me. You just have to choose to follow me. And if you are willing to open your heart, if you are willing to follow me, if you are willing to follow what I'm asking of you, then you will be entering into that covenant, this new covenant between God and humanity, so that you might come back to the garden, and so that we might live together for eternity in relationship with God, right? That's the offer. And so, like, what is the Bible about? It's about a father reconnecting with his children. Okay, so mission of the church, how does that matter? Like, where does that come in? The mission of the church is this. The mission of the church is the objective that Christ was pursuing, right? He was preaching this. He was saying, hey, you, come, follow me, right? Listen to this gospel. I can get you back to God the Father. I can get you back into that perfect Eden. I can get you back to the garden. I can get you back into full relationship, into heaven, into unity with God the Father, right? But Jesus was only around for 3 years, right? His public ministry only lasted for 3 years. And then he was crucified, and then he ascended back up. And what he did after his crucifixion was he gave his authority to his disciples, right? And he handed the keys of the kingdom over to Peter, right? He said, Peter, you are a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against you. Right? Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth be loosed in heaven. Peter, you are the first rock that is given the task of shepherding and serving the faithful in the church. And from Peter all the way down to Pope Francis, we have an unbroken succession of that authority being handed down from Peter to, I'm going to screw this up, to Linus, to Cletus, to Sextus, to Clement, to, I don't know. There's a whole great litany of our first popes, right? And you go through every single one of these popes handed off that authority that was given by Jesus to Peter and then was handed on from Peter on down the line of succession. And it's from that authority and it's from that task that Jesus gave to Peter that the Catholic Church is born. So what does the Catholic Church do? What is the mission of the church? What is the point of the church? The point of the church is to accomplish the mission of Christ. What is the mission of Christ? The mission of Christ is to bring humanity, the whole world, everyone back into relationship with God the Father. So that when you die, and when your neighbor dies, and when your PE teacher dies, and when Bozo the Clown, he might already be dead. You don't even know who Bozo the Clown is. But when Bozo the Clown dies, the whole point is that Bozo the Clown, your PE teacher, your neighbor, you, your mom and dad, your horrible ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, whomever, that they would be able to be in relationship with God. That's basically the mission of the church. Make disciples. But disciples are just people who are following God's will. All right, so covenants and contracts, salvation history, Bible in a nutshell, the mission of the church, those are the highlights. Come to our lessons because it's way more interesting and way more funny. Yeah. All right. God bless, guys. Bye.